Hi, everyone. My name is Megs Shah. I am the host of Chat and Chai with Megs. This month, we're going to be talking with 4 panelists, Joelle, Piercy, Lise-Marie, Monroe, Sweta, Saji, as well as Hero Munkad. Now, as part of this Chat and Chai, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Parasol Cooperative, and then we'll head over to each of our panelists to introduce yourselves. I am Megs Shah. I'm the founder and CEO of the Parasol Cooperative, and it's an organization that provides the technology tools, knowledge, and services to domestic violence organizations so they can accelerate what they do best, which is to protect people. And so at this point, I want to try to turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves, and we will talk more about domestic abuse, the different types, the stigma around it, as well as what you can do based on the survivor stories we have today for you. Joelle, why don't we start with you? Tell us a little bit about Safe+Sound and what you do there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. So my name is Joelle Piercy. I'm the Community Outreach Coordinator at Safe+Sound Somerset. Safe+Sound Somerset is Somerset County's designated domestic violence response agency. Most counties across the country are required to have an agency that provides a hotline and an emergency safe house. And so we are that designated organization in Somerset County, New Jersey. In addition to the 24/7 call or text hotline, the emergency safe house, we also have a wide range of services, including trauma treatment in our counseling program. We have legal advocacy, financial empowerment, as well as a relationship with the Department of Child Protection and Permanency, or Child Welfare Services in our county.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Joelle. Sweta, why don't we go to you? Let's hear a little bit about what Sakhi is doing in New York and what your role there is.
Oh, sure. Hi, my name is Sweta Saji. I work with Sakhi for South Asian Women. I work as an economic empowerment program manager there. So Sakhi primarily works with survivors of gender-based violence, domestic violence survivors. We provide them an array of services ranging from legal advocacy to case management, crisis management. We provide them, financial resources, if they are in need of that help. Or we also do a lot of capacity building workshops, like financial literacy classes, in order to assist them in their journey towards financial stability. We also have a youth empowerment program, which works with children of survivors or our youth survivors. So those are some of our services, and our office is primarily based in New York City, and we provide services to all boroughs of New York.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Sweta. Lise-Marie, why don't we go to you for the introduction for you, what organization you're in, and also a little bit about yourself and your background.
Sure. My name is Lise-Marie Monroe, and I am in Fairbanks, Alaska. I'm a survivor of domestic violence, and I am an officer and the grant manager for Parasol Cooperative. I'm so excited to be working on such an amazing project with amazing people. And I actually almost lost my life to domestic violence 7 years ago. So I had a pretty severe experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Lise, for joining us. I know it's really early in Alaska, so I promise I'll get you some coffee here soon, right?
I've got it. I've got my coffee.
There you go. So fantastic. Hero, why don't we talk a little bit about your experience? Tell us a little bit about you, where you work, anything that you'd like to share with our viewers.
Sure. I am not affiliated with an organization, but I am a survivor of domestic violence. And it's funny, that term domestic violence is something that I never thought I would be associated with. And for me, I always envisioned domestic violence physical, not emotional or financial. So it's a broad term, and I am happy to say that I have been out of my situation for, gosh, I left in 2011, so it's been 9 years, and best decision I ever made. Didn't come close to losing my life, but it was something that really opened my eyes to, what could happen. But for me, I am a pharmacist by training, and I work with Johnson & Johnson. I've been there for about 20 years, and I live in Boston.
Thank you again for joining us, Hero. And, you make an interesting point. There's different types of abuse that are out there. And I think, I was initially, when I first, was going through my divorce, and, many people are aware of it, and Hero and I actually met through a support group because of that. And, I did not quite understand that domestic abuse is much bigger, right? Like, it's more than physical violence. And I think it would be really helpful for us to be able to shed some light on what types of abuse exist. And, it's one of those things that, once you do understand the different types, how do you really know you're going through it or you're experiencing it? Are there ways and tools that you can use to do that? And, Sweta, why don't we start with you? Have you experienced that in New York? And also, Joelle, I'd like to go to you next and to get a better understanding from your perspective of what you notice in Safe and Sound.
Yeah, I can start talking about different types of domestic violence. Before that, I just want to address like a trigger alert, in case while we are speaking of different types of abuse, there might be cases where, you are triggered. So please feel free to mute yourself or put off your camera, take a few deep breaths so that, you can regulate yourself. You can join back after you're ready. So just a trigger alert. I'll start with physical abuse, as Hiral mentioned. Yes, I mean it's very commonly found abuse, and it's very recognizable in most cases, because sometimes most of the times it leaves injuries. So how do you identify it? It can be like pushing, shoving, or slapping. It can range with biting or kicking, throwing objects. Some physical abuse, can also range like locking a person outside the house in the cold. That is also physical abuse. Abandoning a partner in dangerous places, or strangling. So these are signs of physical abuse. That's how you identify that you are, being abused physically. I'll go next to emotional abuse. Again, ridiculing or insulting your valued beliefs, your values, your religion, race, heritage. That also is spiritual abuse. Often it's not addressed, but another sign of emotional abuse is withholding approval or appreciation or affection as punishment. Continually criticizing with shouting and name calling, insulting or driving away family and friends just to instigate isolation, right? Like when a survivor or when a victim is isolated, they don't have the community to draw strength from or discuss it or break the silence. Humiliating partner in private and public places, just targeting their self-esteem, right, through emotional abuse, refusing to socialize with partner. I had a client who, used her abuser used to send her videos of himself inflicting self-harm on himself and threatening her that this is what he will do to her. That is a part of emotional abuse and verbal abuse too. So, by doing all these acts, they just play with the victim's sense of self, right?
I think the mindset really gets affected by it, right?
Yeah,
And I think
yeah.
that's what's so interesting. And with COVID, it's sort of exasperated the problem quite a bit,
Sure.
because now we're sort of being at home with our abuser or someone that they know is getting abused and feel helpless and not be able to help them out. And so Joel, I'll go to you. In terms of the different types of abuse that you see at Safe and Sound and how you address them. But also just, are there tools and things that Safe and Sound has that you use to help people identify that they might be going through those circumstances?
Absolutely. One of the best ways to kind of begin to expand that understanding of domestic violence is really to understand what is at the heart of domestic abuse and domestic violence. We do use those terms interchangeably. And that is, it's a power and control issue. In fact, the U.S. Department of Justice defines domestic violence as a pattern of behaviors that one partner uses to gain power and control over the other person. Physical violence is not part of that definition. Violence can and does occur, but it's more about what power and control it's gaining the person who's using the violence. Also, violence rarely happens, the physical violence rarely happens in a vacuum. When we talk to teens, we frequently say, if someone hit you on the first date, would you keep dating them? And they say no, right? So you have all of those other behaviors, the put downs, the manipulations, the threats, right? That kind of prop up that physical violence and are in and of themselves violent as well, because of that effect. So almost every organization, domestic violence organization, uses a power and control wheel to show that at the heart of all these behaviors is trying to gain power and control over the other person. It's not an anger management problem. It's about gaining power and control. And so I strongly suggest looking at power and control wheels. There's lots available on the web. We also have several different kinds for teens and adults available on our website, www.safe-sound.org under Survivor Services, so that you can look through and again, kind of expand that understanding of what violence is and how it happens.
I think it's interesting you brought up violence is different terms can be used for it. I'm in my faith, I'm Jane, and we believe violence can be inflicted through words, through thoughts, and through our actions. And I think in this case, it's very, very prevalent. But I do think that the definition of getting control is sort of the big thing here. And so I want to kind of walk to Hero, you first. As far as your experience is concerned, with the different types of abuse, as you mentioned earlier, tell us a little bit about what you experienced, and kind of share with our viewers, if you're comfortable sharing it, that way they can sort of understand and potentially relate to it.
Yeah, so I actually married probably, a late bloomer, if you will, in the Indian world. So I didn't get married until I was, I think, 30. So I, was well into, the beginnings of my career. I had a job, a steady paycheck. And when I got married, I married my husband and with his parents, because he was the older son, and that's what happened. And interestingly enough, while we were dating, which was over the course of 14 months, everything was great, no issues. And, it's funny, as soon as that wedding happened, in hindsight, as they say, is 2020, it's as if like a switch flipped. And I recall, moving in, and it was just, it was amazing. And for me, even though I was married to my husband, as I think about it, I think I was married to him physically only, because really my issue was with his mother. His mother made my life a living hell from day one. And she turned into Jekyll and Hyde, faster than you can say, oh my goodness. But she was the one, I think, that really inflicted the abuse over the course of years. I was never good enough. The putting down, there wasn't physical violence. She kept me from my family and friends. So I had moved across states. So I grew up in Pennsylvania and moved to Massachusetts. And I was isolated. And I worked from home as well. So I didn't have that social network. My social network, my support network, all back in Pennsylvania. And it was to the point where, conversations, even with my family, became very curt, very, I didn't want to let on that anything was wrong, because part of me felt like a failure as the years went on, because I felt like I failed as a wife, as a daughter-in-law, and also as a mom once I had my child. And then, it just, over the course of years, it just got worse and worse. And, when I got married, there's a part with the Indian wedding ceremony where your parents bid you goodbye and, you're now part of this family. And my parents' parting words were, these are your parents now, treat them as you would treat us. And so I took that to heart, because that's how I was raised. What I didn't take into account is do that to a certain point, but not when somebody demeans you and just, you lose your self-respect. And I think one of the women was just saying, if you hear something long enough, you start to believe it. So here I am, I have a doctorate in pharmacy, a master's degree, a bachelor's degree. I have a great job, made a steady income, a good income, but yet I was restricted from accessing finances. I, it was put down, told I was, called names, and you start to believe it, and it really does start to impact your self-esteem. And I think the eye-opener for me was, I think my daughter was probably 3 at the time, and my mother-in-law had said to her saying, during the course of one of the blowouts, she had said, you deserve a better mommy, one that loves you, one that cares for you. So that night when I put her to bed, it was right around Thanksgiving, and I put her to bed, and she said, Mommy, she had tears in her eyes. I said, what's wrong? And she said, I don't want a new mommy, I want you. So that for me was the eye-opener.
Yeah, I think it's, different cultures, we have different sort of expectations as well. And it's not always your significant other inflicting the pain. Although, they do play a big part in supporting someone who might be like your mother-in-law, for instance, right? I think where I struggle with this a little bit, right, in terms of the stigma, and in the spectrum of abuse, I think that there's a stigma that all cultures have. And I'd love to hear, Lise-Marie, from you about, sort of your experience. Was there a stigma associated with you I know it was sort of a very abrupt situation, so it might be a little bit different in that context, but I'd love to understand a bit more about what you experienced, if you're willing to share it with our viewers here.
Yeah, absolutely. And the near fatal attack obviously was very abrupt, but the emotional abuse began quite a while before that. And I think, Harold, I really relate to having to play a certain role. I think that that's a really big part of what we take on, and it leaves us limited. So I was a military wife, and actually I also married at 30, so that's really funny, same age. And so, but my now ex-husband was born and raised in Cuba, so we were dealing with very, very different cultural understandings. And we were only married for 6 months before he deployed, and it was while he was deployed that the emotional abuse began. Paranoia about me stealing his money, about me cheating on him, I'm going to leave him, calling me names. It was a very severe switch, and he was dealing with extreme circumstances. He was dealing with near-death situations on a daily basis, so he was suffering from severe PTSD. So I think that that's really important to keep in mind as well, is like, it's typically a very complicated situation. And I too had a vibrant career. I actually identify as a feminist. I have a psychology degree. I also never saw myself as someone who would end up in a situation where domestic violence would play such a huge role in my life. And ultimately, what ended up happening, just to give everybody a context for that, was he did have a flashback and he strangled me. And I went through all 4 of the stages preceding the dying. So I literally did almost lose my life. So I'm happy to be here. I'm also happy, and I think the compassion that I have for my ex-husband is actually quite pronounced, because I realize how much he was dealing with. So I'm also happy for his sake that I am still here, because his life would also be very different. As far as stigma goes, I think for me, the stigma was not so much about domestic violence particularly, but again, relating back to the role. As a military wife, I was in a situation dealing with somebody who was essentially obsessed with violence after coming back from such a severe deployment. So I was trying to weigh what was normal, what wasn't normal, what should I put up with, what shouldn't I put up with, what was dangerous, what wasn't dangerous. I was told as a military wife by my fellow friends who had husbands that had been deployed several times, that if he had a nightmare, that I should throw a shoe at him from across the room and not try to wake him up, because he might be in a state where he had no idea who he was, where he was, and what was happening, or who I was. So there was like this stigma around calling abusive situations abuse, even though he wasn't trying to abuse me necessarily. He was dealing with trauma and trauma responses and triggers. That was the stigma I was dealing with the most. I set a very clear boundary with him because his temper when he came back was extreme. It was very explosive. And so I set a very, very clear boundary. And I said, if you ever touch a hair on my head, we're done. That's it. I'm leaving. And I had social support. I had a career. I was very independent. So I had those capabilities, which not all women do. But I drew that line. And so when I was in the hospital the night that I was strangled, and, you know, we had been in a year of counseling prior, and things were going great. And, you know, we just didn't know what we were dealing with. We didn't understand how dangerous it could be. And so I think really important to take it seriously and to try to view it from an objective point of view and not from a context where maybe violence is normalized or, you know, more acceptable because of the situation. So, and that could be cultural, that could be, you know, military ideals, whatever it is. Yeah. So that's really where it stood out for me, that stigma plays such a huge role.
Yeah, and I think it's different, you know, as you said, I think with someone who's coming back from a extremely traumatized situation back into a relationship. And then there's those instances where, you know, stigma around cultural stigma still exists as well. And I know in New Jersey, you know, it varies in terms of the different cultures and what they encounter. And a lot of it, and I found, Joelle, I don't know if you've seen this in Safe and Sound, is, you know, people struggle to call the police or to call for help from someone who may not be a family member. You know, and I think that it's important for our viewers to understand that that's not the only channel to request help, right? Maybe talk a little bit about what are those channels of help that they can reach out to, and what are the best ways to sort of engage so that they can do it in a safe way.
Absolutely. So the one thing we want to stress to people is that you don't have to be ready to leave a relationship to get help, to access help, right? You know, so what we recommend is the hotlines, the domestic violence hotlines, is that you don't have to, again, be thinking about leaving it. You don't have to be in a certain place in your relationship. You're not required to call the police. But what they do is they safety plan with you, and they create customized safety plans that address those individualized concerns. I know when we have people that safety plan with us, if they don't feel safe calling the police, we have come up with other options. Who can you call? Who are some safe people you can call? If you're not ready to leave the relationship, how do you stay safe while you're in the relationship? What are some safety tactics while you're arguing? You know, part of that is emotional safety, finding people that you can talk to about this that may not be giving you some of that pushback that you're scared of or have experienced before. That's all part of the safety planning. And so, as I mentioned before, most counties across the country, some counties combined, but most countries have their own domestic violence agency. If you're not sure what your local one is, you can call the National Domestic Violence Hotline. I have that number. It's 1-800-799-SAFE. And they will provide some of that immediate support, information, the individualized safety planning, but they can also get you connected with your local organization for additional services. And like I said, at least with our organization, I know a lot of other DV organizations, there's no requirements in terms of having to have a restraining order, anything like that. You know, no matter where you are on your journey to safety and healing, there are resources available.
Thank you so much, Joelle. I think it's important for everyone to recognize that there are organizations like Safe and Sound here in New Jersey. There's organizations all over the United States. And, you know, I will say then the phone numbers, the links, and everything we are talking about here will be included in the video when we do publish this out to you guys. But I do want to make sure that I get a better sense of, you know, in the context of the different states. And Sweta, I'll go to you for this one. You know, for the different states, there's different procedures. You know, there was an instance where I read from somewhere and also heard from another person that, you know, a potential way to reach out for help could be a medical professional. Can you talk a little bit about, you know, how our medical professionals like doctors, primary physicians, pediatric physicians, how they can really play a part in helping individuals with abuse?
Sure, sure. So I can give you some examples that, you know, of my client interactions. So I've had clients, or we have had clients where they have been, you know, referred by their medical professional. They have disclosed to them that, you know, they're going through this abuse, and they have reported or helped them report. Like maybe it's just like placing a simple call to Sakhi and, you know, telling them or connecting the survivor to our office. So that's where, you know, we get the information about these clients, and we call them again, as Joelle said, we help them with safety planning and, you know, connect them with financial resources. You know, we have pediatricians who are connected with our organization who call us because, you know, mothers is close to them, you know, what they're going through. Or lawyer's office when, you know, mothers are or survivors are going and interacting them, you know, seeking legal help, and they need resources to get out of this difficult situation, and they connect them through the legal organization. So I think the first part is, you know, the start of the conversation is like breaking the silence, disclosing it to some trusted person, identifying a trusted person in your community or in your friend circle or in your family. You know, it doesn't have to be one person. If one person doesn't work out, go to the next person. You know, when I was working with children who were in an abuse situation, I used to tell them that identify 5 trusted adults or more. So if one doesn't help, like go to the next one. So identifying that person is very significant, because they can give you access to, say, a safe phone during a crisis, and that can give you the immediate help. So yes, you can, like, you know, maybe a medical professional or a legal professional or your family member or a friend talking about the abuse or your experience is the start, definitely.
You know, I did research a little bit. In Chicago, there's actually a great program that goes through and trains hairstylists and estheticians that do facials. And, you know, I know my hairdresser that I go to, which I don't go very often, but she knows me really well. And so I can open up about things that I normally wouldn't. I know it's not exactly the most safe environment to be talking about these things, and people won't feel comfortable, but you know, to point out what Sweta was saying in terms of the physicians and safety planning, as well as Joelle, you know, safety plans are intended to give you the sense of safety, right? The intent of them is to make sure that you know what steps need to be taken and what steps will be taken to make sure that you are actually going to get to a safe environment or someone you know. And a large part of why we're doing this session, and to kick it off, you know, the reason is we need to raise awareness of what you can really do about these situations if you know someone who's facing it or you yourself are facing it. So having said that, I think what I'll do is I'll go around and just do a quick set of final thoughts that you want to leave viewers with in terms of things to look out for, anything that you'd like to add to what we've already talked about. Why don't we start with Joelle, and then we'll go to Sweta, Hiro, and then Lise.
Yeah, I just want to sum up that, as all of you have been saying really well, it's that we all play a role in ending this. Stigma can, as we've been talking about, can play a big role in a lot of different ways. And so one of the best ways that you can help with this topic is just talking about it to friends, mention it, sharing articles, because first of all, it brings awareness. It makes it more likely that the people who need services will get the information they need. Unfortunately, with COVID, it has been harder for people to get access to that information. And so by helping to share it, you're making awareness more possible. But the other thing you're doing is you're establishing yourself as a safe person to talk about this topic. You know, by spreading awareness, by making this an issue you care about, you make it easier for people who know you to reach out to you if you need help, and then you can connect them to service. So thank you so much for listening. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thanks for being here, Joelle. Sweta?
So I think domestic violence is a horrendous crime, and I think the first step of breaking the cycle of violence is talking about it. And as Joelle said, like spreading awareness by, talking about it, talking about your experience, or if you have the knowledge, the safety information, sharing it with a person who you think might be going through an abuse situation. And that helps a lot. To sum it all, like thank you all for sharing your stories. It has been really helpful for me and for the viewers to understand the abuse, and I think that's how we start to break the cycle of violence, right? And so thank you for your commitment and your passion.
I agree. I think the one thing that really struck me, and Hero, as I go to you with this, is because, I think people also have this perception that domestic violence is not something that I will ever encounter. Being a professional, and I'm an educated woman, this will never happen to me. And I think it's refreshing, but also alarming to hear that that you're out of the situation that you were in, but also the fact that there is no race, creed, gender, social status that is unaffected by this. And I think it's important for us, as we start to talk about domestic abuse and what you can do and how you can actually reach out for help, that it isn't something you should be embarrassed about. It isn't something that you should hold back from asking for help. And it starts with just a conversation. And it could be as simple as posting an anonymous question on a support group. We have a lot of mommy groups and, local selling sites that we have that, in Hillsborough, I go into the swap and sell site. And sometimes there's people that are posting things on there, but you could just post an anonymous question, reach out to the administrator of that group and see if they'll do it. I've noticed that people do that, right? So Hero, I think what I'd love to hear from you is just, what are some parting thoughts? I know being in the South Asian community, there's several different layers of stigma around what we face as far as domestic abuse is concerned. Can you maybe provide some of your last thoughts around this?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I would, looking back, like I said, hindsight is always 20/20. But looking back, like if something doesn't feel right, follow your gut. The other piece of advice, and I was guilty of it, was staying in a bad situation because of the kids. That's never a good thing. I think, I realized after the fact that I am a better parent when I'm happy, when, I don't have that baggage with me. The other thing, don't be afraid to ask for help. We have so many resources, like all of the groups that are represented here, but even, Megs and I met on a social media site on Facebook. I mean, granted, I had already gone through my issues at that point, but my philosophy has always been, if I can help one person, then what I've gone through is worth it. But go on these sites, find the support. And I really wish that the site that I had been on was there when I was going through my issues. Yeah. We have technology available. The thing that I used was J&J offered, and I'm sure a lot of other companies offer it also. It's called the Employee Assistance Program. So I called EAP, and it's funny, when I got hired 20 years ago, I'm like, never going to use this. Yeah. But I did, and the counselor I had was just fantastic. And she's the one that helped me identify that what I was going through was abuse. And I even challenged her. I'm like, no one's hitting me. I'm not being shoved, pushed. Yeah. But EAP was a fabulous resource. And don't be afraid to ask for help, because I know, at least in my culture, going to a therapist is like, oh my goodness, what's wrong with you? Don't be afraid to ask for help. Find your support network, whether it's somebody that you don't even know online, but find ways to be able to connect with people, because, once you find that support network, they're there. And for me, my support network, I used to travel once a week while I was married back to my home office in Philly. So it was then and there where I was able to talk to my brother. I was able to talk to my closest friends. But find the people that you know that are going to support you and that are safe harbors for you to talk about what you're going through.
Yeah. Thanks, Hero. Really appreciate that. And I think, you bring up a good point, is that, you know, when you can reach out and you feel comfortable reaching out, you should reach out. I think the comfort level is really what drives us to a point where we don't.
Yeah,
Right?
and I think a lot of us, especially, you know, as moms, parents, you think twice, 3 times, 100 times before you pull that trigger, because your whole life is going to change.
Yeah.
But I think unless you realize it yourself and you know that that's a step you need to take, people around you can tell you, but you're not going to take that step until you make that choice.
Yeah, and I think it's an intrinsic choice, and it's almost a societal culture sort of upbringing that we've all had, which is, you know, make your marriage work. And you know, and I think to Joelle's point, you don't always have to be in a situation where you're ready to leave your marriage either, right? I think it's a large part to do with understanding who you are, what you're comfortable with, because that will actually help you in your journey to recovery. Right. And, you know, at times there are instances where, you know, the spouse may not recognize that their actions are abusive. And so having the tools and working with therapists and working with advocates that actually know and have the know-how to support you in doing that can actually make a big difference as well. So
I was just going to say, I think you bring up a really good point. Not everybody leaves their marriage, but it's okay to recognize what's going on and to maybe have or seek couples counseling.
Yes.
It's always an option.
Exactly. Lise, are your audio situations resolved? Nope, still nothing. Well, I will, you know, the beauty of Zoom is that it's great to connect with people remotely, but then the audio video challenges around it are always fun to overcome. But first of all, I want to thank each and every one of you. I think this has been a very informative session, and I'm hoping that our viewers can really take what you've said and either pull themselves out of situations that are abusive or help friends and family that might be going through it. So thank you again for taking time to talk to me and joining me in this chat and chai session. I am really excited about, you know, how we can all work together to create that parasol of protection for those individuals that are encountering it. So thank you again.